I think your competitive advantage is your mindset, any leader today. And I can tell you that from doing training. Like, I'll train people on communication skills and listening skills, and then I'll start training people on mindset and mental health. So as a leader, if those roles are going to go away, your role is going to become more about coaching and developing and training people and like mindset training, because people are getting nervous and anxious, like you just said, about AI replacing their job. So if you don't know how to coach people on mindset, then I don't know. I think that's one of those things that you're going to have to really continue to focus on and build that skill.
Welcome to the E-Commerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives, a podcast by Noibu, where we explore the elite strategies and cutting-edge insights with our expert guests. Get ready to propel your e-commerce business to the next level.
Welcome to the E-Commerce Toolbox Expert's Perspective. Joining us today, we have an expert in multiple fields, one being retail, one being commerce, coaching, and leadership. Welcome, someone I've known for a long time, named April. So welcome to the podcast, April.
Hey, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, everyone always wants to start off a bit about or at least I want to hear about your career journey so far. So maybe start off with how you even got into retail in the first place and a bit about your career journey and kind of where you are today.
Yeah, I was born into retail. My mum had an antique shop, so I started at a very young age. But my actual career started when I was around 17, 18. I was an unruly teenager, got kicked out of home, not proud of that, but did get a job in a retail store. And, it was the easiest thing to do, right? To get a job in a retail store, and just kind of stuck with it. So started in the UK, moved to the US, and then moved to Canada on a 1-year visa and ended up staying 16 years. And I've worked for some amazing brands like Starbucks, Apple, Banana Republic, Holt Renfrew, Paul Smith, just to name a few. And David's Tea was my last full-time gig where I was leading 250 stores. So I've been on every role, like kind of worked my way up, and now I train and coach. So yeah.
That's awesome. What led you to found Retailu and maybe talk a bit about what Retailu is?
So Retailu really came from an idea that when I was working at David's Tea, my CFO came up to me and said, "Hey, April, like if we had to save this amount of money, where could we save it from?" And so we started looking at all the technology that we had, right? Like where the spend was. And he said, if we could get rid of this platform, the specific platform that none of us really loved at the time, and replace it with something else, what would you do? So it sent me on a search to look for like other platforms and other ways of delivering learning for the store teams. And so that's where it started. And then it evolved and it became kind of like that go-to for everybody I know that was asking me like, where are all the tools that you'd built every time I'd worked with them? So yeah, it started there, and now it's just grown into one of the biggest online on-demand learning libraries for field leaders to develop their soft skills.
It's really cool. Obviously, you've been in retail for a long time. How have you seen the leadership of retail change over the last 5 to 10 years, especially kind of post-COVID?
Yeah, I think what I've seen change is the priorities of where they are investing their spend. Like specifically, if I go back 15 years ago, when omnichannel was coming in commerce and everything, and everybody was looking for that way to get all of the product online, the spend really shifted from like people development back then into technology. And so fast forward today, though, I think what's happening now post-COVID is that there's like a real desire and a need to be able to switch back into that people model first, because lots of leaders now are more junior in role, have got promoted in the last couple of years because a lot of people exited the business. And so the leadership, I think, right now is really lagging in terms of like decision quality, how to manage teams, how to manage adversity, how to live in ambiguity. Because like really 3 years ago, nobody knew what was going to happen the next day, right? So all of these leadership skills are really like kind of lacking in the newer generation. And I think that we need to take that seriously and set them up for success. I just got back from a conference, right, where I was speaking to a whole load of retail leaders. And one of their top priorities right now is developing and training their teams to have those skills to drive the brand forward and be successful in the future.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to hear you say that, because I think, to your point, especially on the digital side of the business, a lot of that's new, right? So it's the age-old LinkedIn joke is, hey, we're looking for someone with 25 years of experience for something that has existed for 5 years, basically, or 10 years. So I think obviously like skill training, development, all of that is going to be really critical. Obviously, you have a ton of experience in retail, but you have non-retail experience as well. What are some of the unique challenges that commerce leaders kind of face in fostering that kind of positive culture? Especially a lot of these folks have now gone with remote teams over COVID, where maybe at the beginning they were not hiring remote and then they started hiring remote. Now people have these kind of weird hybrid teams. I know us, we're in this situation as well, where 70% of people are in a certain location and then everyone else is kind of scattered. So yeah, I'm curious your experience and just seeing this play out. What are kind of some of the unique challenges, and how should leaders think about addressing them?
I think one of the biggest challenges, and this is what I heard last week, just to keep it really current, is just keeping people engaged. Keeping people engaged and keeping that creative process that happens when you get together in meetings, or like when you're in an office environment and you walk past each other's desk and you like had an idea and now all of a sudden you're asking somebody and sharing it. And so I think the connection of that creativity is one of their biggest challenges, because when you're working alone in a silo at home, you might be getting your tasks done, but you're not necessarily engaging with people, right? You're not having these off the cuff kind of like ideas that just get brainstormed out. So that was something that just kept coming up last week. And also just building in like very clear expectations and follow-up practices, right? How do you hold people accountable when they are working from home? What does that look like in a new world, especially for office environments? For me, I worked in the field, so I managed teams remotely my whole career. So we had ways to make sure that we were keeping people engaged, keeping people positive and recognized, keeping people accountable and following up. So I think that's a big one. And also like managing time. Like everybody is starved for time. Everybody's expectations have gone up. There's less people post COVID, I think, doing the job, right? Like AI is coming in as well. So that's kind of like interesting. But I think, yeah, that's probably one of the biggest ones. That's the biggest problem I've heard. And so, what do you deal with that? That's why a lot of people are coming back together in conferences and summits and master classes and all that stuff, because they just want to have that connection. And I don't know, how do you manage that? Like, how do you make sure that everybody's connected when you're not in that environment where everybody's crossing over functions all day? It's really, really hard.
Yeah, it is really, really challenging. And I'd be lying if I said that we figured it out 100%. I think it's a relatively new challenge in the sense of we tried to stay localized, call it pre COVID. During COVID, we started expanding. It starts with Toronto, it goes to Montreal, and then all of a sudden you meet the perfect candidate. They live in the US. So it's very much something that we're actively looking at right now. I think, to your point, engagement's really big, making sure. One small thing that I could say that we've done pretty well over the last 6 months is we try and fly everyone in at the same time, because people like to visit about once a quarter to the office, stay a week. But if people are coming every other week, then no one's really there together. So, for example, actually, tomorrow we have most of our team in office. So, we're doing like an all hands meeting for 2, 3 hours, and then everyone's going go karting and for dinner together. So, like, those are the types of things.
Yeah, because you got to build in the social part of which you don't have in the office when you're like going to get a coffee or a tea or something, right? Like you don't have that anymore.
Mhm.
It's really important.
So that's something more on the social side, but just like fostering ideas. One thing that actually our R&D team started doing is they do like their large brainstorming sessions where it's like a hybrid exercise. So they use something like Miro, which is basically like virtual sticky notes. So that's something that the team's been using. But yeah, it's a really hard problem to solve. Honestly, that's why I wanted to bring on the expert.
You know what I heard though last week as well from one of the CEOs? I think it was the CEO of AG1. I think, and they're a commerce product, right? Like they're in the wellness space. And she said that she gets everybody together and they call it like a war room. And then they get together, they have this meeting, and then they literally let the doors open. So for any of those introverts that are like, I need time to kind of think through things, they go off, go and do their work. Other people are welcome to stay in the room and think things through out loud. and then they regroup at the end of their day. And I thought that was really smart. I was like, what a great strategy, because that gives people like the best of both. Because you could get overwhelmed now. You've been at home all the time working by yourself, and now all of a sudden you're overwhelmed when you're back in that experience. So I thought that was a really great idea as well.
Cool. That's interesting. Flipping the switch a little bit here, one thing that I've seen firsthand, which I'm assuming you have as well, is attrition rates in retail are pretty high. If we even fork it out looking to online teams, I see kind of like an average like 18, 24-month tenure, especially post COVID. I think a lot of people that got a job in 2018, 19 actually were in such high demand that they made it all the way out to 21, 22, where maybe they're now on the move. Curious, like what are some strategies to ensure that you're kind of retaining the right people and you're not consistently flipping over the team and losing all that tribal knowledge?
Yeah, I was just doing some research again on it today, and it really is funny because it really hasn't changed in the last 25 years, as long as I've been in the workforce, or longer than that now. But it's literally comes back to two things. Number one, they have to be engaged and like their boss. Not personally as a person, but kind of, but they have to kind of like working for you, number one, because that ignites those positive emotions and feelings towards you, which then ignites it towards the company, which means they'll be more loyal and they're more apt to do more, work harder, be more engaged. So number one, that's really important. And then number two, everybody wants to be promoted and earn more money. People go to work because they want to progress and they've got bills to pay. So that second part means that you need to be providing clear career paths, ways, and training and development to help them get there. And these are continuing to be in all the reports that I've read from Gallup, or LinkedIn did a report the other day around employee statistics. And that hasn't changed. That was always the same. When I read exit interviews, right, over, I don't know, a whole decade, it was people left because of their boss, never because of pay, and secondly, because they didn't feel like they had a career pathway and clear development. So training and development is still going to be, I think, one of your number one strategies to people engage. And that means, though, you need to know what that is. If you go back to school, right, high school, we had IEPs or EIPs, I don't know what they were called, but they were like development plans for people.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that in your business, you're putting people at risk, and they might like you today, but they have one bad moment and they are at risk of a recruiter contacting them and making them some kind of offer on a day when they've had a bad day. And that's when people jump. So I think you got to keep your pulse on people and remember those two things.
That makes sense. I really, really enjoy that perspective. I think that's, to your point, the exit interviews, they always sound the same for the most part. So, what about times like now? Obviously, we're on the tail end of like a crazy rapid growth cycle. Usually that's met with some sort of technological advancement or market disruption, probably in the form of AI now. What does that kind of next 5, 10 years look like in your experience, right? Obviously, towards the beginning of your career, you saw part of the dot-com boom, the crash, some emerging tech came out of that. Like, curious, yeah, like in these kind of changing times of uncertainty, how as a leader do you adapt? Because basically what I think retained people 18 months ago is likely a bit different than now. It's like different anxieties, more anxieties around maybe being let go and like laid off, replaced with AI versus 18 months ago. People were like, kind of like, hey, my last raise was 6 months ago. When's my next raise?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kailin. I think your competitive advantage is your mindset. Any leader today. And I can tell you that from doing training. Like, I'll train people on communication skills and listening skills, and then I'll start training people on mindset and mental health. It is May, so it's Mental Health Month, is number one request all the time. And actually, when we do trainings and we hear people's takeaways, it's always about their mindset and how to reset their mindset and then how to help their team do that. So I think mindset cannot be underestimated as a skill. Like, you have to have a positive mindset. You've got to be able to get into that state of mind. So I think that's your competitive advantage. People just can't work for negative people anymore. They just won't tolerate it. Like, that's it. So you've got to be able to solve things in a positive way. And then second of all, you've got to get ahead of the curve. Like, you cannot be ignoring AI and thinking, oh, it's not going to be really big and I don't need it and it's just another like fad. It's not another fad. it's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to replace some jobs in the office, not in the field, funnily enough, because if you think about locations, you need people in the locations to service the customers walking in. But I think there's going to be some whittling down in marketing teams and things like that, where AI can kind of support generate things faster. So as a leader, if those roles are going to go away, your role is going to become more about coaching and developing and training people and like mindset training, because people are getting nervous and anxious, like you just said, about AI replacing their job. So if you don't know how to coach people on mindset, then I don't know. I think that's one of those things that you're going to have to really continue to focus on and build that skill.
I've seen in my experience sometimes negative people, and obviously they don't know they're being negative. For the people that are listening, how do you know if you are a pessimistic boss, right? There's always the layer of, I'm just a realist. That's my favorite one. I'm a realist. Curious, like, if what you're saying is people don't want to work for pessimistic, negative people. Question, how do you know if you are one? And two, how do you fix it?
Yeah, I think how do you know that you are one? You're totally below the line. You're the one that complains about everything, doesn't buy into anything, then enrolls everybody else in that conversation, why you should not move forwards with that strategy and what's wrong with it. Because I'm not about not being real. Like, as a leader, you need to face reality all the time so that you can get level set and see what needs to be fixed. Like, I learned that a long time ago in my retail career when we used to make everything look perfect for like head office folks, like us to like go and walk the stores. And that wasn't realistic because they couldn't solve things that they didn't see were real. But, facing reality and getting to a neutral place of like looking at it from a neutral, objective space and then going, okay, how can I solve this, is very different to being the naysayer and the complainer and then enrolling everybody else in a negative conversation and influencing that way. I think that's how you know you're negative. If you're always complaining and you're always enrolling everybody in a conversation that isn't about solving a problem, right? You just don't like what other people are doing. So I think there's a really good analogy above the line, below the line leadership. And when you're below the line, you're defensive, you blame people, right? You're negative, you don't say a way out. And if you're acting like that, then that's where you're below the line and you're negative. But I would ask people to give you feedback as well, right? Like, if you're not open to feedback and you don't have a growth mindset and willing to grow, that's another indicator that you could be behaving in a way that's just negative and going to derail your team.
Makes a ton of sense. How do you fix it?
How do you fix it?
Yeah. If you're listening now and you're like, oof, I see that. I see those traits in myself. Like, how do you go about fixing that?
Well, you have to be self-aware, first of all. So self-awareness is key. And then you have to start basically, you know, releasing those negative thoughts and taking ownership on that. And in the second book, I write about release, reach, and reframe, which is a process that you can use to release a negative thought, reach for a new one, and then reframe it by anchoring it in a positive affirmation. So that could sound like, I don't believe that we're going to achieve this goal, and I'm telling 20 people in the office that we can't do it, to realizing that that's not really supportive right now and it's below the line. So what could I do? I could release it by journaling it down, writing down all my thoughts that are not helpful, and then choose a new thought, a new belief, like saying to yourself, I'm choosing to believe that I'm part of the solution. I'm choosing to believe that we have the resources that can do it. I'm choosing to believe my team can figure this out. You start to really reprogram yourself. And journaling is a big thing when it comes to mindset, because we have 6,000 thoughts a day and 80% of them are negative. So you got to train your brain just like you train your body when you're working out. It's just one of those things that people don't do. But, that's why I say it's going to be a competitive advantage in the future. I truly believe that.
Have you ever seen, and I know there is a correlation, but I'm curious, when you look at like high performing teams, how does tenure rank in terms of like key characteristics
That's a really good question.
on a high performing team?
I mean, tenure is great because it comes with experience and knowledge. And I just remember at David's Tea, us being such a new company that every time somebody left with tribal knowledge, we were trying to figure it out again. So the value of the tenure was literally the experiences that they'd already learned that didn't work. They could share it with us. But when they all left, we were just spinning our wheels trying to figure it out. So tenure's good, but that tenure where it's like, oh, we've tried this before and it didn't work is not good, right? Because there's two sides of the coin all the time. There's this like experience and knowledge, but then the resistance to change. So I think knowing there's 6 supporting blocks that when you have them in place, they literally support positive change. And so knowing which one's missing, you can identify what resistance you're creating when you're trying to take a team with you to that positive change. And that's regardless of tenure or not.
I love it. I love it. As we look to wrap up, April, what do you think the biggest mistakes that retail brands are making right now in terms of hiring, attracting, or maintaining their talent base?
One of the biggest mistakes I see is the assumption that people know what they're doing. It's probably one of the biggest awarenesses that comes up in the workshops that we do when we're working with leaders. They make assumptions that they have explained and their team knows what they're doing. And so I think that the investment in training your team to make sure that the expectations are really, really clear will set them up for the future. And that's just one of the biggest mistakes I see, because people just hire people on and think that they're just going to be able to do the job. Again, it goes back to making sure that they're set up for success. So I don't think throwing money at people motivates people to stay and continue to grow. It does for a short period of time, but it never solves the problem. So I think that's a problem. And I think also looking at benefits, ways to support women in the workplace. Apparently, women in the workplace is starting to have a decline. And there's been a study that came out through Deloitte, actually. Can't wait to read it because it was shared with us last week, where companies need to look at benefits and helping that sandwich generation. So there's a sandwich generation now of people that are looking after elderly parents and also looking after kids because they've had kids later on in life, right? If you think about my generation, we had kids in our 20s, people are having kids in their late 30s, early 40s now. So there's 2 generations that they're looking after, and that is going to impact the workforce. So I think that's another big thing that retailers need to look at, what those benefits look like to support that workforce be able to continue to go to work.
Makes a lot of sense. I could especially see that, like, with if you're forced to be in an office 2 days a week, it literally might not work because you have to be home.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, April, this was awesome. This was one of my favorite episodes because it was kind of completely outside of normally what we talk about. We typically don't talk about staffing and retention. We typically talk about conversion rates and stuff like that. So really, really loved your opinion on this. And thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
The Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noibu. To find out more about Noibu and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noibu.com. That's Noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noibu, thanks for listening.